what would be handy to start with is maybe just walking people through how or what they ask when they come to you initially around, I think I want to buy a business, what do I need to collect? Because I've overheard a number of the phone calls and there's often a few missing pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and no two phone calls are ever identical because everybody's coming from a different background and every business is different. But broadly, let's assume that you've found a business that you're interested in, because I think even before you find the business that you're interested in, there's a whole nother chapter that goes before that of actually going and finding out the type of business that you're interested in. And, you know, in terms of industries and the type of work and how it's structured, whether you want to go into that or not, we can come back to. But the process typically would involve, firstly, how much is the business worth? Establish, is what the prospective or what the vendor is asking for, is it reasonable? More often than not, from what we see, the values are pretty much okay. And as with everything, just like buying a house, it's up for negotiation. You can get that checked by doing a valuation. Then at that stage, you'd typically be looking at putting an offer together. So again, not too dissimilar to buying a house where there's a sale and purchase agreement. There's one for a business. But with buying a business, it looks a little bit different. We're not buying a house. We're buying assets that are split between physical assets and intangible or non-physical assets. And once that purchase price has been agreed, you then go into what's called the due diligence process. And that's the period of time that you've basically got to get your crew of experts around you. So it's lawyers, accountants, bankers, any other specialists to do a deep dive into the business, look under the hood and go, what's this business actually on about? Do the numbers stack up? What's the story that the numbers are telling? Because typically when somebody buys a business, they're not number nerds like an accountant. So they're not going to be able to look at it and go, geez, is this good? Or what does that mean? It's got gross profit of 32% this year, and then it's got gross profit of 27% the following year. What does that mean? Salaries, for example, to shareholders, it might be big one year, it might be small the next. Why? So we go into starting to uncover some of those little rocks and tell the story behind the numbers to basically say to the prospective purchaser, you, the listener, hey, this is what we can see financially from the business, but also here's some non-financial risks as well as financial risks, and at the same time, here's some opportunity. The whole purpose of due diligence is not to give you, yes, you should buy this or no, you shouldn't. Ultimately, that decision's got to be made by the purchaser. But at the end of the day, basically a really detailed report to give you some level of comfort that you've engaged the right people to answer the questions that you don't know how to find the answers to.
Nice. Because when you make the offer, you make it subject to due diligence, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably similar to going back to buying a house. A lot of people will say subject to a builder's report or inspection.
Spot on.
Or whatnot. So you're basically making an offer of intent that you're keen to buy the business, but you still want your time. Is it normally 20 days?
20 days minimum working days. So again, this is, I suppose, where, like buying a house, the process is somewhat similar, but it actually takes longer because property in New Zealand is so much more liquid because we love a property. You can list it and have it sold within, if the property market's boiling, within a matter of days or weeks. But in times like now, maybe 60, 90 days.
Yeah.
With a business, it could be different. We've seen information memorandums, so that's the initial booklet that the broker will have prepared by the vendor. All the pretty pictures, we can come back to that later. We've seen some businesses that have been on the market for up to a year, sometimes over a year. So that's a business owner on the other side, a seller, vendor, that's wanting out. They want to sell, but no one wants to buy.
Yeah.
And it's either the right purchaser isn't in the market. There might be other circumstances surrounding it. They might be asking for too much. It could be a niche industry, but it's not like a house and it does take some time. And the same happens through that due diligence phase, or if you're buying your house, getting the builder's report, getting legal advice, you can get that knocked off within a week sometimes in a house. With a business, you're 20 working days, absolute bare minimum. In our experience, you can typically get an extension because when you're hot on buying a business, it's not often that there's going to be another backup offer like there is with a house.
Yeah.
So the broker and the vendor are going to want to nurture you as the purchaser to go, yep, let's keep ticking this along to make sure that we can get this deal across the line. So yeah, once due diligence is done and you've got all your information, then you're basically going to go, yep, we've satisfied due diligence. Like with a house, you'd probably want to make it subject to finance as well. And then you're going to want to go off and talk to a bank and make sure you got the number side of the equation stacked up.
So team typically that you'd be pulling together for that DD due diligence period would be a grunty accountant that isn't just, not always just your standard compliance accountant that has some experience in this space, right? And then lawyer, and then banking kind of, but sits in the finance camp, right?
Yeah, and then even on the lawyer, like you referenced the accountant, not your typical kind of compliance accountant who does accounts and tax returns, kind of similar with lawyers as well. You don't want somebody that just does conveyancing, which is, if you're going and buying and selling houses, that's not the type of lawyer that you want to use. You want somebody that's got some commercial nous or acumen that is able to review contracts, highlight risk, and be able to tell you absolutely everything. Because if you're buying a business that's got a lease and any employees and that kind of thing, the lawyer's going to go through all of those documents and tell you warts and all what you're up for to make sure that you're going into it eyes wide open and going, oh, gee, I didn't realize that on this lease we're only just at the beginning of an 8-year term and there's a personal guarantee attached to it, or that you've got 5 employees and there's all these entitlements that that they've got that a standard employment agreement potentially doesn't have. So that's really where a lawyer can add value. The other one would be is if you're buying, and it's not incredibly often, we've had it once where a client's purchased a business and it's in a specialist industry where there's some real technical pieces of equipment. We can't do due diligence on that because we're only good with numbers. A lawyer, probably the same thing, pretty good at reading, not much else maybe. And that's where you need somebody that's a specialist with equipment to basically come in, assess the state of the equipment and go, is it worth what they're saying it's worth in the sale and purchase agreement, and what's the state of it? Is there any deferred repairs and maintenance? Is there any issues with the stuff and being able to get them serviced? If it's an international piece of machinery, you've got it in New Zealand, we can be pretty isolated here. If you've got to get parts from Europe. So all of those kind of things to then factor into going, well, if you're producing something and this piece of machinery breaks down, how long are you going to be out of action for and how do you manage that risk?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the little things that you don't know that you don't even know until you get started on a journey like this though, right?
100%.
Because I think even when you're talking about that, people